She spent 15 years in prison for a crime she didn't commit. 15 years. 5,475 days staring at cold concrete, counting the ticks of a clock that seemed to mock her stolen life. Her name dragged through the mud, her children turned against her, her future erased. But when Lillian Graves finally walked out from behind those unforgiving bars, she wasn't looking for redemption. She wasn't seeking apologies. She was hunting for payback. And you better believe, she made sure the real criminals paid. Paid in full. This is the story of Lillian Graves, a woman betrayed in the most intimate, devastating way possible. By the man who vowed to cherish her, the partner who shared her dreams, her secrets, her life. He orchestrated a meticulous, cruel setup, framing her for his own greed and infidelity. He watched, emotionless, as the system swallowed her whole. While she endured the dehumanizing hell of prison, he moved on, replacing her, erasing her, living the life she should have had. He left her to rot, a forgotten footnote in his triumphant narrative. But justice, oh, justice has a peculiar way of finding the guilty, even if it takes 15 long, agonizing years, even if it has to carve its own path, through flesh and bone. Before we dive deep into the chilling execution of Lillian's revenge, do yourself a favor. Hit that subscribe button for True Crime Hunter right now. Click the bell too, because you won't want to miss a single detail. Trust me on this one. This story? It's absolutely not what you think. The official reports barely scratch the surface. Welcome to Blackwood Falls. On the surface, it's the kind of town where appearances are everything. Perfectly trimmed hedges guard pristine homes, neighbors exchange polite waves across driveways, and local gossip flows like the meticulously maintained fountain in the town square. It's a place built on presenting the right image. At the heart of this community stood Lillian Graves. To everyone who knew her, Lillian was the embodiment of grace and warmth. A dedicated wife to the successful Daniel Graves, a nurturing mother to their 2 children, and a reliable presence at every charity bake sale and school board meeting. She was trusted, admired, the quiet pillar holding her perfect world together. Her life looked flawless, enviable even. Her husband, Daniel, played his part just as convincingly. He was the town's golden boy realtor, charismatic, persuasive, always closing the deal. He projected success and stability, the ideal family man. But Daniel cultivated a hidden life, one carefully concealed from Lillian and the watchful eyes of Blackwood Falls. His secret had a name: Natalie Voss. A young, driven paralegal at his firm, Natalie was everything Lillian wasn't. Bold, overtly ambitious, and seemingly unconcerned with discretion. Their affair wasn't just a fleeting mistake. It was a calculated arrangement. Natalie, perhaps seeking advancement or drawn to Daniel's power, grew increasingly brazen. Subtle clues began to surface. The lingering scent of an unfamiliar, expensive perfume in Daniel's car, a lipstick smudge on a collar, he swore came from an accidental brush past a colleague. Small inconsistencies in his stories that started adding up. Lillian wasn't naive, just trusting. But even trust has its limits. The late nights Daniel blamed on demanding clients became more frequent. The sudden, urgent business trips left little trace of actual business conducted. Whispers she initially dismissed as paranoia started to echo with uncomfortable truth. She began noticing the small things. Daniel's defensiveness when questioned, his phone suddenly guarded like a state secret, the vague answers that never quite satisfied her unease. When Lillian finally voiced her concerns, Daniel didn't just deny them. He expertly turned the tables. He'd express deep disappointment that she could doubt him after all they'd built. He'd meticulously pick apart her observations, making her feel foolish, overly sensitive, even unstable for connecting the dots. He'd dismiss her intuition as stress or fatigue, convincing her that the problem wasn't his behavior, but her perception of it. He made her question her own judgment, her own sanity. Have you ever been in a situation like that, where someone you trust makes you feel like you're the crazy one for noticing something wrong? Let me know in the comments below. It's a manipulation tactic that's disturbingly common. It happened on a Tuesday night, under the cover of a relentless autumn storm. Lillian returned home later than usual, delayed by a lengthy school budget debate. She walked into what she expected to be a quiet house, ready to unwind. Instead, she found Daniel in their home office, pacing frantically, his face a mask of exaggerated distress. "Lillian, thank God you're here!" he exclaimed, his voice tight with feigned panic. "Look, someone's been in here. The safe. It's empty." He pointed towards the heavy steel door swung wide open. Inside, where $50,000 in cash, funds Daniel claimed were set aside for a property investment, should have been, there was nothing. He wrung his hands, putting on a convincing show of shock and violation. "Everything's gone. $50,000, Lillian. Gone." He avoided her eyes, focusing instead on the empty safe, his performance carefully calibrated for maximum effect. He had set the stage for the final act of his betrayal. What Lillian didn't know was that Daniel was the thief. Hours earlier, he had carefully removed the cash. He knew Lillian had accessed the safe just the day before to retrieve some documents. Banking on this, he methodically wiped away any trace of his own presence, leaving only hers. He even went a step further, tampering with their home security system's recordings. He skillfully edited the footage, creating a deceptive timeline that showed Lillian entering the house alone at a time that aligned with his fabricated window for the theft, while conveniently erasing any record of his own movements or Natalie's brief earlier visit. With the scene perfectly arranged, Daniel made the call. His voice, laced with manufactured urgency, reported a robbery, emphasizing his wife had just returned home, and they'd made the terrible discovery together. He planted the seeds of suspicion, subtly guiding the narrative before the authorities even arrived. The police arrived, their investigation immediately focusing on the evidence presented. Lillian's fingerprints were prominent on the safe. The security footage, expertly manipulated by Daniel, appeared to show she had the opportunity. There were no signs of forced entry anywhere else in the house. To the responding officers, it seemed straightforward. Then came the crucial blow. Natalie Voss voluntarily came forward. With feigned reluctance, she told detectives that Lillian had been acting strangely for weeks, seemed desperate for money, and had even made veiled comments about needing a large sum quickly. It was a calculated, venomous lie, delivered with chilling conviction. Natalie painted Lillian as unstable and financially desperate, providing the motive the police needed to solidify their case against her. The trial was a devastatingly swift affair. The prosecution presented what appeared to be an open and shut case. Lillian's prints, the incriminating footage, Natalie's damning testimony, and Daniel playing the part of the heartbroken, wronged husband. Lillian's defense attorney, perhaps underpaid or simply outmatched by Daniel's careful planning, struggled to poke holes in the fabricated evidence. He couldn't prove the footage was altered, nor could he effectively discredit Natalie's convincing performance on the stand. Lillian's pleas of innocence sounded desperate against the weight of the manufactured proof. The jury needed little time to deliberate. The verdict came back, guilty. Guilty of grand theft, guilty of fraud. Lillian sat frozen as the judgment was read, the room seeming to tilt around her. The life she knew, the family she loved, the reputation she cherished, all destroyed by the man sitting just feet away, watching her downfall with cold satisfaction. As deputies escorted her from the courtroom, Lillian paused. She turned her head slowly, her gaze finding Daniel's amidst the crowd. There was no pleading, no hysteria, just a low, steady voice that cut through the courtroom murmurs, heavy with promise.
"You'll regret this, Daniel. You will live to regret this day."
The heavy gates of Blackwood Correctional Facility slammed shut behind Lillian. sealing her fate and severing her from everything she had ever known. The initial days blurred into weeks of shock and disbelief. The woman who once organized community fundraisers now navigated a world of rigid schedules, constant surveillance, and casual brutality. The comforts of her former life were replaced by rough uniforms, inedible food, and the crushing weight of injustice. Worse than the physical hardships was the profound isolation. Her appeals for contact with her children were systematically blocked by Daniel, who painted her as a dangerous influence. Her own parents, swayed by the conviction and Daniel's lies, eventually stopped writing, believing the worst. Friends faded away, unwilling or unable to associate with a convicted felon. She was utterly alone, adrift in a sea of hostility, armed only with the knowledge of her innocence and the burning memory of Daniel's betrayal. The soft edges of the community pillar began to chip away, revealing something harder beneath. Time in prison grinds you down or sharpens you to a point. Lillian refused to be ground down. The initial despair gave way to a cold, simmering anger. She learned to navigate the complex social hierarchy of the prison, becoming watchful, quiet, and self-reliant. She built a wall around herself, not out of fear, but out of necessity and focus. She saw firsthand what desperation did to people, the lengths they would go to for survival or petty advantage. She learned to read intentions, to anticipate threats, to project an aura that discouraged unwanted attention. Her energy wasn't spent on futile rage against the system that imprisoned her. It was channeled. The prison library became her sanctuary and her training ground. She devoured every law book she could get her hands on, focusing initially on appeals and wrongful convictions. But as the years passed and legal avenues closed, her studies shifted. She learned about evidence, procedure, forensics, and perhaps most importantly, how criminals covered their tracks and how they got caught. Knowledge became her weapon, patience her shield. Through carefully worded requests during library time and snippets gleaned from discarded newspapers or overheard conversations, Lillian kept tabs on the outside world, specifically on Daniel. She tracked his real estate dealings, noted his community involvement, followed the lives he paraded publicly. It was a slow, painstaking process, assembling fragments of information into a coherent picture of the life he was living while she languished. Then came the letter. A single folded piece of paper from the one childhood friend who hadn't abandoned her, delivered discreetly. It contained news that shattered Lillian's remaining illusions and solidified her path. Daniel hadn't just moved on. 2 years after her conviction, he had married Natalie Voss. They were living in her house, the home she had decorated, the place where she had raised her babies. They were raising her children, poisoning their minds against their own mother. The betrayal was absolute, a violation so profound it extinguished any lingering flicker of the woman she once was. This was the final straw. The knowledge that Daniel and Natalie were not only free but thriving on the ruins of her life, raising her children under their roof, became an unbearable weight. It wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It wasn't about reclaiming her past. 15 years of stolen life, 15 years of lies, 15 years of watching them prosper while she suffered. It all coalesced into a single, unwavering purpose. The law had failed her. Justice, she decided, would have to be delivered personally. Her transformation was complete. The countdown to her release had begun. Think about it. 15 years. Could you hold on to that kind of anger, that kind of focus, for so long? What do you think was going through her mind in that moment? Share your thoughts below. 15 years after she entered Blackwood Correctional Facility, Lillian Graves walked out into the gray morning light. She wasn't the same woman. The softness was gone, replaced by a steely resolve forged in isolation and fueled by betrayal. She didn't pause to look back. Her gaze was fixed firmly on the future, or rather, on settling the debts of the past. She moved like a ghost, leaving no trail. She didn't contact her old friend, didn't reach out to anyone from her former life. Years of studying law and criminal behavior had taught her patience and methodology. She spent weeks reacclimating, observing, gathering the final pieces of information she needed. She watched Daniel and Natalie from afar, learning their routines, their habits, their vanities. She noted Daniel's continued success in real estate, his unchanged arrogance, and Natalie's comfortable complacency in the life stolen from Lillian. They felt secure, untouchable. They were wrong. Lillian's plan leveraged Daniel's own weaknesses, his greed and his carelessness. Years ago, using money from her inheritance, they had purchased a secluded lake house, a weekend getaway spot. Lillian knew Daniel rarely visited it anymore but hadn't sold it, likely holding on to it as an asset. Crucially, she suspected he'd never bothered changing the locks she herself had installed. Using untraceable methods, she crafted a fake identity, a wealthy, out-of-town buyer interested in the neglected lake property, offering a price significantly above market value. She contacted Daniel through his professional channels, using the fabricated persona. The bait was irresistible, a quick, highly profitable sale requiring minimal effort, perfect for his ego and his wallet. She insisted on an evening meeting at the property to finalize the details, citing a tight travel schedule. Daniel, blinded by the prospect of easy money and confident in his own charm, readily agreed. He likely saw it as just another deal to close, another win. He convinced Natalie to join him, perhaps promising a celebratory dinner afterward. They had no idea they were walking willingly into the spider's web. The November air was sharp and cold as Daniel and Natalie arrived at the dark lake house. The property was silent, the only light coming from their car's headlights cutting through the gloom. They approached the front door, Daniel perhaps making a joke about the seller's eccentricity. He used his old key. The lock turned easily. Inside, the air was still and heavy. As their eyes adjusted, they saw her. Standing silently in the center of the room was Lillian. Not the broken woman they remembered from the courtroom, but someone transformed, her presence commanding the space, her eyes burning with an intensity that froze them where they stood. Recognition dawned slowly, then hit them with the force of a physical blow. Shock gave way to disbelief, then raw fear. Daniel stammered, perhaps trying to regain control, demanding to know how she got there, what she wanted. Natalie shrank back, her earlier confidence evaporating. Lillian didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every calculated movement, every cold glance spoke volumes. She let their panic build in the suffocating silence of the isolated house. What happened next wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't a plea for understanding. It was the culmination of 15 years of stolen life, of simmering rage honed to a razor's edge. Lillian didn't scream. She didn't allow them the release of a quick, impersonal end. She moved with chilling precision. She made sure they saw her face. She made sure they understood why. In their last moments, Daniel and Natalie were forced to confront the architect of their demise, the ghost they thought they had buried long ago. Justice, in Lillian's hands, was intimate and terrifyingly final. When her work was done, Lillian vanished as completely as if she'd never been there. She left behind no fingerprints, no fibers, no DNA. Every step had been planned, every contingency considered. She cleaned the scene with meticulous care, applying the knowledge she'd absorbed over 15 years, ensuring nothing connected the events at the lake house to the recently released inmate. She walked away into the night, melting back into the anonymity she had cultivated. Daniel and Natalie's bodies were discovered 3 days later by a concerned colleague when they failed to show up for work. The authorities arrived, conducted their examination, but found little to go on. No forced entry, no witnesses, no apparent motive beyond the obvious conclusion that the couple had met a violent end. With no leads to follow and no suspects, the case quickly grew cold, filed away as another unsolved tragedy in the quiet woods surrounding Blackwood Falls. Lillian Graves was never questioned, never suspected. She had simply disappeared. An eye for an eye, or did she become the monster she hunted? This is where true crime gets complicated. Let me know your verdict in the comments. Was Lillian justified? And so, the official story ends. Two prominent citizens met a violent end in a remote location. A tragic, unsolved crime. Life in Blackwood Falls eventually returned to its placid rhythm, the double homicide becoming just another local legend whispered about over coffee. As for Lillian Graves, the woman released from prison just weeks before the killings, she simply ceased to exist. No forwarding address, no bank activity, no trace. Officially, she vanished. But unofficially, the whispers persist. Some say Lillian fled the country, finally finding peace far away under a new name. Others swear she never left. They claim she's still out there, an unseen guardian or a patient hunter watching from the periphery, waiting for the next liar, the next betrayer, to slip up, waiting to deliver her own brand of final judgment. Lillian's story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about justice, revenge, and the lines that blur between them. She was undeniably wronged, subjected to a profound betrayal that cost her 15 years of her life, her family, her identity. Daniel and Natalie's actions were cruel, calculated, and destructive. They built their happiness on her suffering. But does profound suffering justify taking lives? Does enduring injustice grant a license for lethal retribution? Betrayal burns, leaving deep scars that may never truly heal. But revenge? Revenge consumes. It can twist the victim into something unrecognizable, something mirroring the very darkness they sought to punish. So the question remains, hanging heavy in the air. Was Lillian Graves ultimately a victim reclaiming her power, or did she become a monster in her pursuit of vengeance? You tell me. What do you think? Head down to the comments right now and share your perspective. Victim, monster, or something else entirely. There are no easy answers when emotions run this high and the stakes are life and death. These stories, even fictionalized accounts inspired by real darkness, serve as potent reminders of human capacity for both cruelty and resilience. If this story shocked you, if it made you think, if it stayed with you, please smash that like button. It truly helps the channel reach more people who appreciate these complex narratives. And share this video. Maybe someone you know needs to hear this cautionary tale about how secrets and lies can fester, leading to devastating consequences. Don't forget to subscribe to True Crime Hunter and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the shadows of human nature. Thank you for watching. Stay aware, stay safe.